Good morning, everyone. I'm Frederick John De Velarde from Bachelor of Science and Secondary Education, major in Science. Today, we will talk about the education and modernity and Marx and the philosophy of Praxis. First, let's talk about the education and modernity. It is begin from Michel de Montaigne to give point after he lived from his experience of modernity. Montaigne doubt about human life and human affairs, so he scrutinized or inspect about human behavior, virtue, and also education and friendship. In his skepticism, he differs very much from René Descartes. So, both thinkers, Montaigne and Descartes, provide hint as the evolving role of reason in the modern age. Montaigne skeptical takes on the ego that also important because it shows how modernity and Montaigne shows the misconception about what we think we know about ourselves. Then it becomes indispensable or absolutely explore human existence. It is elaborated on how education or Bildung is closely related to the what Montaigne's quest of modernity. So, what Montaigne is looking for modernity is closely related on how education or Bildung modernity. Bildung is closely related to the English terms liberal education, and the concept of Bildung articulate a general dimension of modern life in Western democracies. This could be also the reason why Bildung discussed throughout internationally. In order to set out the concept of Bildung, it is necessary to provide picture out more clearly the notation of modernity, and Montaigne already become clear the modernity about the loss of reliable tradition and secured or assured knowledge. So, he talks about education or Bildung within the context of modernity, in the context of the Enlightenment and the idea of personal self-determination. There are five concepts in education and modernity. First, the signature of modernity. Second, is Friedrich Schiller later on aesthetic education. Third, Wilhelm von Humboldt theory of Bildung. Fourth, Hegel's phenomenology of experience. And last, the Bildung and ethos of modernity. Now, let's begin with the signature of modernity. When we say modernity, it refers to the condition of quality of being modern. It is a new experience of time takes shape. So, Hans Blumenberg, a philosopher, has spoken of a reflective curiosity taking shape in the modern era. In his view, this curiosity is not about the expectation of discovering something new, but rather in the never-ending question on how we are to go on from here. Then, Reinhard Koselleck's general description of modernity is the discovery of a new world, because it is brought by technology, innovation, and development commerce. So, because of this, progress education or Bildung form a correlate or connection about this progress. Without going into further social historical details, Bildung or education can be seen as a leading category of modernization, and it connects individual and social development and takes up the promise of a better future. So, in signature of modernity, it represents the philosophical by the work from conceptual history. Reinhard Koselleck here writes extensively about how modernity was developed and thematized as a new form of time and consciousness. Now, let's move on to Friedrich Schiller's letter on aesthetic education. On Friedrich Schiller's about the aesthetic education, it represents to help humanity to attain political freedom. Schiller regards human nature as divided between body or sensual matter and mind, the rational, moral, ideal form. Schiller, only art has the capacity to reconcile both these opposing aspects of human nature. In his idea, scholars hope that the success of aesthetic education would help establish the freedom that political revolution had conspicuously failed to achieve. It is a curious fact that in his reflection on the nature of aesthetic judgment, Kant is only incidentally interested in art. Next is Wilhelm Humboldt and his theory of Bildung. He believed that it is the heritage of a humankind. This can be fulfilled by the linking of the self to the world to achieve the most general, most animated, and most unrestrained interplay. According to Humboldt, Bildung is the process in which the self is linked to the world in the sense of an interaction. Humboldt believed that the university education in general, as in the Prussian education system, it should enable a student to become autonomous individual and world citizen by developing their own reasoning power in an environment of academic freedom. So, it shows how Bildung is closely linked to modern experience. And then, for Hegel's phenomenology of experience, in his phenomenology of spirit, it starts at the lowest level of human consciousness and works dialectically to the level at which the human mind attains the absolute point of view and becomes a vehicle of infinite self-conscious spirit. His main insight is that the truth cannot be put in pocket like coin. So, presenting the approach offered by Schiller, Humboldt, and Hegel, the relevance of aesthetic experience, negativity, and plurality for Bildung is demonstrated. And the last is Bildung and the ethos of modernity. From the word ethos, it means belief in modernity. It tells about the educational, philosophical approach in relation to other conceptions of modernity. Here, it is argued that the reference and confrontation with the classical authors presented can also be framed in terms of modern questions concerning who and what we are today. So, that's all for the education and modernity. Now, let's proceed to Marx and the philosophy of praxis. Marx and the philosophy of praxis. Before we talk about this topic, let me tell you about who is Karl Marx. Karl Marx, born on May 5, 1818 and died on March 14, 1883. He was a philosopher, author, social theorist, and economist. He is famous for his theories about capitalism, socialism, and communism. Now, let's proceed to our topic, Marx and the philosophy of praxis. Young Hegelian August Sitkowski was one of the earliest philosophers to use the term praxis. That means action oriented towards changing society. Sitkowski argued that while absolute truth had been achieved in the spiritual philosophy of Hegel, the deep division and contradiction in man's consciousness could only be resolved through concrete practical activity and direct influence social life. Marx used the term praxis to refer to the free, universal, creative and self-creative activity through which man creates and changes his historical world and himself. Praxis is an activity unique to man which distinguishes him from all other beings. He also affirms the primacy of praxis over theory, claiming that theoretical contradictions can only be resolved through practical activity. Marx has criticized the materialist philosophy of Ludwig Feuerbach for envisaging objects in a contemplative way. Marx argued that perception is itself a component of man's practical relationship to the world. To understand the world does not mean considering it from the outside, judging it morally, or explaining it scientifically. Social cannot be changed by reforming who understand its need, only by the revolutionary praxis of the mass whose interest coincided with that of a society as a whole, the proletariat. This will be an act of the society understanding itself in which the subject changes the object by the very fact of our understanding it. Now, let's go on to what Marx's production of ideology. Karl Marx makes different statements about ideology at different points in his career. However, his most straightforward statement about ideology appears in the German ideology, which he wrote with a Friedrich Engels. Ideology itself represents the production of ideas, of a conception of consciousness, all that means says imagine, conceive, and includes which such things as politics, laws, morality, religion, and metaphysics, or etc. Ideology functions as the superstructure of civilization, the convention and the culture that makes up the dominant idea of a society. The ruling ideas of a given epoch are, however, those of the ruling class. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal of expression of the dominant material relationship. The dominant material graphs as ideas, hence of the relationship which makes the one class the ruling one. Therefore, the ideas of their dominance, since one goal of ideology is to legitimize those forces in a position of hegemony. It tends to obfuscate the violence and exploitation that often keep a disempowered group in its place, from slave in tribal society to the peasantry in feudal society to the proletariat in capitalist society. The obfuscation leads to the logical contradiction in the dominant ideology, which Marxism works to uncover by returning to the material condition of a society's mode of production. Two, there are two types of modes of production. First is the productive forces. Marx refers to as the means of production. In a given time period, ideology is most clearly revealed by uncovering the condition of production. Second is the social and technical. Marx referred it also as the relation of production. The way the society structures the relation between individuals, particularly through the division of labor, which together make up the mode of producting. And then, let's proceed to Marx and social form of consciousness. Marx's theory of consciousness possesses the dialectical unit of human thought and practice. It is actually a theory of praxis, but much more. To reiterate, according to Marx, thinking and action, consciousness and sentience human experience are inseparable. Marx believed the real world and consciousness should be understood relationally rather than as the separate things. The real world was and always would be changing and developing and therefore it was historically specific. Marx and Engels believed it was necessary to remain constantly on the real ground of history, rather than explaining practice from the idea. It is important to explain the formation of ideas from material practice. Marx also believed that just as circumstances helps to form human beings also help to form circumstances. They are not passive actors of historical processes. Consciousness and the activities of real people cannot be separated. Men are the producer of their conceptions, ideas, etc. Real active men as they are conditioned by a definitive development of their productive forces. By combining a revolutionary approach to the both being or ontology and knowledge or epistemology and persisting the inseparable unit of active extension with thought, they had created a theory of praxis.